Imagine this scenario. You are standing in a coffee shop. You know what you want. You want a medium latte with oat milk. You have studied the words. You know latte, you know milk, you know please. But when the barista looks you in the eye and says, "What can I get for you?" you freeze. Your brain starts racing. You think in your native language, "I want a coffee." Then you try to translate it word for word, checking the grammar, checking the pronunciation. By the time you open your mouth, 5 seconds have passed, and you feel foolish. Why does this happen? Why do we know the vocabulary on paper but fail to access it in the moment? It's not a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of mental training. Today, we are going to solve that problem. We are exploring how to train your brain to actually think in English. Specifically, for those of you at the pre-intermediate or A2 level. I'm Noah, and joining me to break down the neuroscience and the practical habits of language acquisition is Eloise, a linguist and communication coach. Eloise, welcome.
Thank you, Noah. It is a pleasure to be here. And that scenario you just described, that is the universal nightmare of every language learner. It's the translation gap.
The translation gap, it sounds like a canyon we all fall into.
It is a canyon, and most people build a bridge across it called translation. They hear English, they translate it to their native language, they formulate an answer in their native language, translate it back to English, and then speak. That is 4 steps. The brain is fast, but it is not that fast. The goal of our conversation today is to show listeners how to burn that bridge and simply jump across, to go from thought directly to English.
That sounds ideal, but let's be the devil's advocate for a second. If I am a beginner, let's say I'm an A2 student, I don't have enough vocabulary to think in English. My thoughts are complex. My English is simple. Isn't thinking in English a privilege for advanced speakers?
That is the biggest myth in language learning. And it is a dangerous one because it keeps you stuck. You do not need complex vocabulary to think in English. You only need the vocabulary you currently have. If you know the word hungry, you can think, "I am hungry." You don't need to think, "My stomach is rumbling and I would desire a 3-course meal." The training starts with simplifying your thoughts to match your current level, not waiting for your level to match your complex thoughts.
So it's about reducing the resolution of your thoughts, making them pixelated?
Exactly. It is about accepting a simpler version of reality in your head. But before we get into the techniques, we have to look at the history of why we do this. For decades, language education was dominated by the grammar translation method. You sat in a room, you read a sentence in French or German, and you translated it. You were literally trained to use your native language as a crutch.
Right. The old school style. The cat is on the table. Translate.
Yes, and scientifically, this builds a neural pathway where English is dependent on your native language. We want to build a new pathway where English is independent. We want to connect the physical object, the cup of coffee, directly to the English word coffee without the middleman of your mother tongue.
Okay, let's get technical. How do we fire that middleman? Because he's been working in my head for a long time.
We fire him through a technique called the internal monologue or narration. It is deceptively simple, but difficult to maintain. The exercise is this. As you go about your day, you narrate what you are doing in your head using simple present continuous sentences. For example, right now, Noah, if you were doing this, what would you think?
I would think, I am sitting. I am looking at Eloise. I am holding a pen.
Perfect. Now that feels incredibly basic, doesn't it?
It feels like I'm a toddler. I have a ball.
And that feeling of being a toddler is exactly where the magic happens. When you were 2 years old, you didn't learn your first language by translating. You learned by associating the word with the action, by forcing your adult brain to say, "I am pouring water," While you actually pour water, you are physically binding the English verb to the action. You are bypassing the translation center of the brain.
So for our listeners who are at that A2 level, they can understand simple sentences. Their homework is to walk around their house and literally whisper, I am opening the fridge. I am taking out the milk.
Yes, and I recommend whispering it. There is a concept in psychology called the production effect. Studies have shown that saying a word out loud, even quietly, makes it significantly more memorable than just thinking it. It involves the motor cortex, the muscles in your mouth. You are training your mouth to feel the shape of the words.
This leads me to another point. A lot of students tell me they can read perfectly, but their mouth feels heavy or clumsy when they try to speak, like their tongue doesn't know where to go.
That is a physiological issue, not an intellectual one. Your mouth is a gym. If you haven't been to the gym, your muscles are weak. For this, we use a technique called shadowing. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard of it, but explain it for the listener who hasn't. Is it just repeating after a recording?
It is, but with a twist. In traditional repetition, you listen to a sentence, pause the audio, and then you say it. In shadowing, you do not pause. You listen to a podcast, simple English, slowly spoken, and you try to speak the words almost at the same time as the speaker, maybe half a second behind. You are a shadow following them.
That sounds stressful. If I'm half a second behind, I'm constantly chasing them.
It is stressful, but that stress is useful because you are speaking while listening. You don't have time to think about grammar rules. You don't have time to translate. You are forced to copy the rhythm, the intonation, and the emotion of the speaker. It turns off the analytical part of your brain and turns on the imitative part.
I see. It bypasses the monitor. I remember reading about Stephen Krashen, the famous linguist who talked about the monitor hypothesis. Can you explain how that fits in here?
Absolutely. Stephen Krashen is a giant in this field. He theorized that adults have a monitor in their heads, a little editor that checks every sentence for mistakes before we say it. This monitor is useful for writing, but for speaking, it paralyzes us. It's that voice that says, wait, is it in Monday or on Monday?
And while you're debating in or on, the conversation has moved on without you.
Exactly. Shadowing forces you to shut down the monitor because you're moving too fast to edit yourself. You're just flowing. For A2 students, I recommend finding a podcast that is just slightly above your level. Krashen calls this I+1, input plus one. If you understand 100% of it, you aren't learning. If you understand 50%, you will get frustrated. You want to be at about 80 to 90% comprehension.
So let's say I'm an A2 learner. I'm doing my narration. I am walking to the bus. I'm doing my shadowing in the evening. But then I have a real conversation and I panic. I forget everything. Is there a psychological component to this training?
There is a massive psychological component. Krashen calls this the affective filter. Think of it like a wall. If your anxiety is high, the wall goes up and no amount of English input can get into your brain. If you are relaxed, the wall goes down. The problem is most adults carry a lot of shame about making mistakes. We feel that if we speak like a child, we are a child.
That's deep. It's an identity crisis. In my native language, I'm smart. I'm funny. I'm articulate. In English, I'm simple.
Yes. And you have to embrace that simplicity. You have to be willing to be the fool for a little while. The students who progress the fastest are the ones who don't care if they sound silly. They just want to communicate. There's a trick I use with my clients called the alias.
The alias? Like a secret identity?
Sort of. I tell them to invent an English-speaking persona. Maybe his name is Jack. Jack is confident. Jack speaks slowly but loudly. Jack doesn't care if he makes a grammar mistake. When you switch to English, you aren't Noah anymore, you are Jack. It creates a psychological distance between your ego and your language skills.
That's fascinating. It's like method acting for language learning. I want to circle back to the thinking part What about objects? I've heard of the sticky note method. Does that actually work, or is it just interior decoration?
Putting sticky notes on everything in your house, table, chair, mirror. It works for the first 3 days. Then your brain ignores them. They just become part of the background noise. A better method is active recall. Instead of reading a label, look at the object and challenge your brain, what is this in English? If you don't know, don't look it up immediately. Struggle for a second. That struggle signals to the brain that this information is important.
The struggle is the learning. If it's too easy, it doesn't stick.
Precisely. And here is a concrete exercise for our A2 listeners to try this week. It's called the 5 Sense Check-In. Pause 3 times a day. Stop whatever you're doing, look around, and name, in your head or whispering, one thing you see, one thing you hear, and one thing you feel. But you must use full sentences.
Give us an example.
Okay. I see a bright screen. I hear the traffic outside. I feel the cold desk. Simple. Subject, verb, object. This trains your brain to process the world through an English lens, not just translate words in a vacuum.
I love that because it grounds you in the present moment. It's almost like meditation.
It is, and that grounding reduces the anxiety we talked about earlier. If you are focused on the physical sensation of the cold desk, you aren't focused on, oh no, is my grammar perfect?
Now, Eloise, I have to ask about the cultural aspect. English is a global language now. It doesn't belong to England or America anymore. How does understanding this help a learner train their mind? Does it take the pressure off?
Ideally, it should. Many learners are obsessed with having a native accent, usually American or British. But the reality is, most English conversations happen between two non-native speakers. A Brazilian talking to a Japanese person in English. They aren't judging each other's accent. They're just trying to bridge a gap. If you train your mind to value connection over perfection, the words flow easier.
So we're moving away from correctness and toward clarity.
Yes, clarity is king. And interestingly, when you focus on clarity, thinking simple, clear thoughts, your accuracy actually improves because you aren't trying to build these complex architectural sentences that collapse under their own weight.
Let's troubleshoot. What happens when a student tries these techniques? They narrate their day, they do the shadowing, but they hit a plateau. They feel like they are stuck at A2. They can say, I am walking, but they can't express an opinion.
That is the transition from A2 to B1. To cross that, you need to move from describing to opining. The exercise changes. Instead of saying, the coffee is hot, you practice saying, I like this coffee because it is strong. You add the word because.
The power of because.
It is a magical word. It forces your brain to extend the thought. I am tired because I worked late. I am happy because the sun is shining. You are training your brain to connect two ideas in English. This is how you build complexity naturally, step by step. You don't jump from the cat is black to philosophy. You jump to the cat is black because.
That is such a manageable step. It doesn't feel scary.
And it shouldn't be scary. Consistency is more important than intensity. I tell my clients, give me 15 minutes a day of focused English thinking. Do not give me 3 hours once a week. The brain learns through repetition and sleep. You need to sleep on the new habits.
I think that's a key takeaway. We often treat language learning like cramming for a history test, but it's more like training for a marathon. You don't run 20 miles on your first day.
No, you run 1 mile, and you do it every day. And eventually, you stop thinking about your legs. You just run. That is fluency. Fluency isn't knowing every word in the dictionary. Fluency is when the language feels automatic, when you don't have to search for the word table. It just appears.
Before we wrap up, I want to address the skeptics. Some people say, I can't talk to myself in public. People will think I'm crazy. How do we do this training in the real world, on the subway, at the office?
You don't have to move your lips. The internal monologue can stay internal, but I will say this. If you are walking down the street wearing headphones, nobody knows who you are talking to. You can pretend you are on a call. It's a great disguise. Use the technology to your advantage. Record yourself on your phone. Send yourself a voice note on WhatsApp describing your lunch.
That's brilliant. A voice note diary. You can listen back and hear your own progress.
And you will cringe at first. You will hate the sound of your voice. Everyone does. But after a month, you will hear the difference. You will hear the rhythm improving.
Eloise, this has been incredibly insightful. If you could leave our A2 listeners with just one mantra, one thought to carry them with them today, what would it be?
I would say be comfortable with being unfinished. Your English is a work in progress. Do not wait until you are perfect to speak. Speak now, think now, with the words you have. The training happens in the arena, not in the library.
The training happens in the arena. I love that. Listeners, your arena is your kitchen, your commute, your coffee shop. Start narrating, start shadowing, and kill that translator in your head. If you found these techniques helpful, or if you try the 5 cents check-in, send this episode to a friend who is also learning. It's always easier to train with a partner.